All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome into the Unsportsmanlike Content Podcast. Special guest today, Ed Kracz from Sports Illustrated. Ed, thanks for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Ed Kracz from Sports Illustrated. Oh, echoing a little bit there. There we go. We got Zach Deal, as always. Sean Redden joining us. Ed, just give us a little background into what got you into the sports journalism field, working for Sports Illustrated and stuff like that.
Well, this is a real history lesson here. I probably would have to give a shout out to a guy named Barry Sankey, who is in the area. He was really an editor at a local paper, and I used to wrestle in high school, and he would write stories, and I got to know him. And he said, why don't I come answer the phones, and take results on the phone, and I'll send you out and cover some games and stories, and you get a byline. So, I mean, that's really how it started, very young. I really had no intentions of getting into sports journalism. I really had no idea what I wanted to do. In fact, I went to college my freshman year, and I was an accounting major. So, it really kind of spurred some interest in me. And then I kind of parlayed that into getting on as a full-time freelancer with the Philadelphia Inquirer back when they had these zone sections for each county. They were called neighbors, and I worked in their Delaware County Neighbors Bureau, and I did that. So they were really my first two gigs. I did that for a few years, and then I moved on. I've, lived in other places and written for different newspapers all through my time in journalism. Just getting on with SI.com now. And really prior to that, I was with the Eagles Wire with USA Today, and they were really kind of my first two forays into website writing. Like, I've always been a newspaper guy, but, we've all seen how newspapers have gone, unfortunately, down the tubes these last few years. So this is really my first foray into kind of writing online stuff, which I really enjoy. There's more immediacy. You don't have to wait till the next day for your stuff to appear. So when things happen, you can react and write about it.
It's a great point right there. So you talked about Barry Sankey being a big influence on the start of your career.
Yeah.
What else, like growing up, influenced you with sports? Like, was there a team, certain players that you looked up to or inspired by as a child?
Well, in these quarantine times, I kind of was thinking about who my favorite athletes were in each sport. And really the impetus behind becoming a sports fan was my father, who would read the sports section front to back every single day. And, I'd come in and I would read it after him. And then we would talk about, all the Philadelphia sports that were taking place. But my four favorite athletes probably in Philly. I grew up, in Philadelphia area. So I was a fan of all four sports, but I would say, and this is old school, but I would go Harold Carmichael's my favorite Eagle. I'm so glad he got into the Hall of Fame. Really a great guy to watch play. The first of the real big-bodied receivers, 6'8". He was so much bigger than guys. He would win every jump ball, and he could run, and he was just so fun to watch. A lot of people would pick Brian Dawkins, obviously, but I go Harold Carmichael there, and then Flyers. I love Bernie Perron. I was a goaltender in street hockey growing up, and they were winning cups, and loved Bernie. Had my bedroom at home like wallpapered with Bernie shots from Sports Illustrated. So I love Bernie. And then the Phillies. That's a tough call. I'd probably go Steve Carlton. Loved watching him pitch. Loved his commanding presence on the mound. And then the Flyers. I said the Flyers. Who am I missing? Sixers. Dr. J. Obviously. Loved to watch the Doc fly.
It's a great list right there.
Yeah.
Some all-time legends on that list. Oh, yeah. I met Bernie Perrant once in Wildwood. He was signing autographs, and I made sure to get one for my dad because he was just, let's be honest, he was one of the last great Flyers goalie this team has had. And unfortunately, with the season now kind of in flux and in jeopardy, we finally get the good goaltender in Carter Hart, and now we don't know what's going to happen in the end.
Well, it's a good thing he's only 20 years old, right? I mean, he's going to be around a while. And they had a good one in Pelle Lindbergh back in the 80s. Pelle Lindbergh looked like he was going to really take off, and then, the tragic car accident that he had so kind of robbed us of him. But hopefully Carter Hart can be the next great goalie.
I think every Flyers fan is hoping for the same.
100%.
But Ed, I have a couple questions for you. Get your knowledge on some Eagles questions. This year, the Eagles announced that when they re-signed Jaylen Mills, they re-signed him as a safety. Very interesting. I always thought personally that he would be a good safety. How do you feel? Do you think the experiment will work, or do you think maybe Kayvon Wallace or Will Parks may end up taking that starting role week 1?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a shame we don't have OTAs where we can actually watch the experiment take place on the field. It's all virtual that they're doing now. But when they made that announcement they were going to make him a safety, it seemed like, okay, it makes sense because they really don't have anybody. They let Malcolm Jenkins go. So, yeah, it makes sense. But then they went out and they signed Will Parks. They drafted Kayvon Wallace. So they have some other players that if this experiment goes bad or they want to put Mills at one of the other cornerback spots opposite Darius Slay, you have that flexibility. So I'm not convinced now, as I was back when they announced that he's going to actually play safety, just because we'll see how Will Parks does. And, of course, Kayvon Wallace, we'll see how he adjusts and adapts to the NFL. But, if he picks it up quickly, it could be a short-lived experiment for Mills, and maybe he's back on the corner opposite Slay.
That'd be interesting because now there is that opening at the second corner spot where we don't really know if Maddox will step up or even though Rasul's been a trade target, if they decide to keep him, if he's the next guy. So it's very interesting to see that secondary.
Yeah, Sidney Jones too. I was going to say
Sidney too, of course.
Yeah. We've all learned Sidney Jones is maybe in a second cornerback role could be good, but when he's pressed in that first role, like we saw the Dallas game, he gets beat. He was working with a little bit of an injury, but do you think there's any nickel in Jaylen Mills' future at all? I know we signed Nickel Roby-Coleman, but just at a speed standpoint, more of a physical aspect, that's kind of like a safety position in itself in the dime package. So think there's any nickel possibility with him?
Again, yeah, I could possibly see that. And again, it has to do with Kayvon Wallace and his development. If he comes in and really picks things up, I mean, he's a physical guy. He's got some good size. He's 5'11", 205. Was used in that role at Clemson. Pretty good blitzer off of the edge. So I could see Mills doing that. But, they do have some other candidates. Obviously, they have Cravon LeBlanc also, who has played in there. Avonte Maddox, and then Wallace could be that guy. But yeah, Mills is a physical guy who, if you have a bigger receiver in the slot and you want to match up with him, then I could see them putting Mills in there. Sure.
Absolutely. Switch over to a different position, the wide receiver position. It seems like the Eagles are really focusing on speed, especially with Jalen Reagor and Marquise Goodwin now coming aboard. Kind of worries me for when we get down to the red zone with Alshon's uncertainty on this team. Do you expect them to use maybe Hightower as a big body wide receiver, or does Whiteside maybe take a step, or they stick to old reliable and they're going to keep using Zach Ertz?
Yeah, and Dallas Goedert, he's another guy that had 5 touchdown catches last year, and Ertz had 8. That's 13 touchdown passes for your 2 tight ends. I mean, they're still the big weapons on this team, in my opinion. Obviously, when DeSean Jackson comes back, he'll be a big weapon too. But, you mentioned Ortega-Whiteside. He's a big guy, 6'3", over 200 pounds. He's a guy that should be able to be a weapon in the red zone. But, what did we see from him last year? Really a whole lot of nothing. Big disappointment. You hope that, he can take that step. They always say that for NFL players, that step between year 1 and year 2 is supposed to be huge, and you hope, Ortega-Whiteside is able to do it. But, he just didn't really show a whole lot of anything to give you any optimism at all that he can be a weapon. I mean, he had some decent catches. He did have 1 touchdown catch. But I think they'll try to bring him along and make him one of those weapons. And then other than that, you're right, the big physical type of receiver after Alshon, they don't really have one at this point. They do have a lot of smaller, speedier guys. I mean, I know Hightower, the kid they drafted from Boise State, and Quez Watkins from Southern Mississippi State. I mean, they have decent size, but they're burners, and they're more used to getting open in space and then turning a shorter throw into a touchdown. So it's going to be an issue. And Miles Sanders is also a good red zone threat, and we saw Boston Scott kind of emerge in that role too last year. So they have weapons, just not that big prototypical jump, center type player, power forward type player at the wide receiver, other than Jeffrey and hopefully Ortega-Whiteside.
Now, Ed, talking about their new weapons, you talked about Quez Watkins. They drafted who's a burner. Hightower, they drafted who's a burner. Reagor, who I think is a really solid overall receiver, is also primarily a burner. And then they swapped 6 with the 49ers to pick up Marquise Goodwin. I'm dead set on Marquise Goodwin will not be on the opening day roster just because I'm really high on Quez Watkins and Hightower, the guys they picked late. Am I crazy for that, or because I just think the injuries, history, the inconsistency, and I don't see it translate to Marquise Goodwin making a spot over these two young guys.
Sean, that's, they got 13 wide receivers on this roster. I mean, and that's after they cut two about 15 minutes before we came on the air here. They just released River Craycraft and Mark and Michelle, who I liked, made a big play in a preseason game last year with Nate Sudfeld throwing a long touchdown pass. But they had 15 until they cut those two guys. So, how many are they going to keep? I mean, that's the question. Are they going to get 5, 6? So do the math. Marquise Goodwin's in a battle to make this team. And you could say because he is a bit of a veteran, if he can stay healthy, then maybe you put Watkins and Hightower, you try to get them to the practice squad. But you don't know about Alshon Jeffery, how his health is going to be. He's rehabbing from this Lisfranc surgery that he had right near the end of the season. I don't think he's probably going to be ready. He may not even be on the team. I think he will be, but he may not be ready. So, there's maybe 5 or 6 job openings for 13 guys. Does Goodwin fit in that picture? I have no idea. I mean, he's fast. And, when they signed him, I kind of equated it to like Torrey Smith. Remember Torrey Smith, when he came over from the 49ers, I think he had 20 receptions or so the year before in 12 games, maybe 230-plus yards. It didn't have a great season. He came to Philly and helped the Eagles win a Super Bowl. So I'm not saying Goodwin's going to do that, but, you look at the production is the same between Smith and Goodwin. The difference is Goodwin's had problems with his health. If he can stay healthy, he might be able to help.
100%. So talking about some of the former players, Nigel Bradham left this offseason after being on the team since the Super Bowl year. Yep. Jason Peters as well. I just did some film study on my Twitter about Andre Dillard, and it wasn't too promising. He kind of gets blown up at the point of attack, and a lot of people, it's been a narrative about him the offseason that they could be looking for a replacement. Drafted 2 guys at tackle in the draft from Auburn, the same school. And it kind of seems like they kind of want as many guys in that room as possible. Do you think maybe Nigel Bradham or Jason Peters could be on the board for a return like we saw with Corey Clement today?
Well, just to talk about Dillard, one of the things he needed to do, and he knows this, is he has to get stronger, which a lot of guys that come in, as linemen really have to do to hold up against bull rushes. I mean, I think his agility and his speed and his footwork are there. They could always get better, but his big issue was strength. I mean, he needs to get stronger. So not being able to lay eyes on these guys, usually we'd be gearing up for rookie camp and then OTAs here in the next couple of weeks. You'd like to see if he met that mandate and he went out and got stronger. You hope he did. He seems like he wants to be a good player. I think that talk about trading up or trading him to the Jets to move up to 11 in the draft, that was probably a lot of smoke. I'm not sure there was a lot of fire there. The Eagles traded up to get him, so they're gonna count on him. It's interesting. There's a lot of buzz about Jason Peters coming back. Howie's mandate was let's get younger, and Peters does not fit that bill at all. I mean, he's 38 years old, played at a high level, but he's a guy you really got to kind of nurse and manage to get through a season, and then there's no guarantees he will. So it's going to be a question of whether the Eagles are very comfortable with Dillard, if they're comfortable with these 2 linemen you mentioned from Auburn that they took, Prince Tega Wanagahu and Jack Driscoll. I think Driscoll's more of an interior guy when all is said and done. I think he'll move into guard. He talked about even maybe taking some center reps, which, the Eagles could certainly use somebody to step in when Jason Kelce decides to call it quits, which I think he may do after this season. But Prince Tega Wanagahu, man, he's a big guy. He's a raw guy. Great story. I wrote about him when I was out at the Combine in Indianapolis. Terrific kid, came over from Nigeria. His grandfather is the king of a village over there, which makes him a legitimate prince. That's why he's not. That's not his name. I mean, that's a title. He's an actual prince from Nigeria. But I mean, just a great story. Great kid. I had a great time talking to him. Very engaging. Very likable. I hope he pans out. I think he could possibly develop into becoming the swing tackle that they could use behind Dillard / Peters if they bring him back, and Lane Johnson, because Halapoulivaati Vaitai is no longer part of the team. But then who's the other guy? Oh, Bradham. I don't see them bringing in Bradham. I really don't. I think he kind of burned some bridges last year when he didn't show up for the final preseason game for the bus to go to New York. He missed rehab time. I mean, he just did some things kind of detrimental to the team policy that kind of got swept under the carpet. Great player in the Super Bowl season, but I think you've seen his skills diminish a little bit. So I would be surprised, especially after they brought in these two speedy linebackers in the draft, Davion Taylor from Colorado, and in Temple, Sean Bradley from South Jersey. I mean, these two kids, they could pay dividends at some point, maybe not right away, but that's the kind of mold they're looking for, is a fast type of linebacker, and Bradham just doesn't fit that mold. I don't know if that answers your question, but Peters to me, I think is probably a 50-50 call, maybe even less than that, maybe 60-40. He's not coming back. I would just be surprised if they brought him back. But again, you don't know how Prince is going to be. Prince Tega-Wanagahu, you don't know how he's going to look. You don't know how Jordan Mailata is going to look at that tackle spot. So it's all about how they feel those guys are going to look. And I don't know how they're going to determine that by looking at a computer like we are now. You want to see them on the field. You want to see guys move, and they're not going to have that opportunity.
100%.
Right. Yeah, this offseason is going to be a learning situation, I feel like, for every team.
Yeah.
And it's kind of – that's why I felt the need in the draft was to get guys who you felt like are NFL ready right now because of the limited resources in the offseason. And that kind of leads me to the next question, is the biggest topic, obviously, in Philadelphia right now was the Eagles using their second-round pick on Jalen Hurts. Since it's settled, I kind of see it. I mean, they did need a backup quarterback, and I'm kind of just reserved in the opinion that in my imagination, I'm just going to pretend they picked Wallace in the second and Hurts in the fourth to ease my mind. But we actually have a question in the comments here from Jason McLaughlin, and he said, is there a chance Hurts sees the field this year, and in what type of role?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he'll see the field. The role, I guess, is to be determined. I know Marty Morningweg, who is an offensive consultant on the Eagles right now. He was the offensive coordinator in Baltimore when the Ravens took Lamar Jackson. And Morningweg devised a package for Jackson that required, they had him run the ball. They had him throw the ball. I think he ran the ball 23 times in the 9 games before he became the starter, through 12 passes. So I could see them using Hurts in that type of a role, maybe having a small package for him. And again, he's a kid that has to develop, had a great college career, piled up tons of rushing yards, accurate passer, 80 career touchdowns to 20 interceptions, played at 2 football factories in Alabama and Oklahoma. So he's a kid that really still needs to develop, but I think you can find a role for him in the run game, maybe do some trick gadget type plays. I mean, I think the Eagles offense looked a little stale last year, very uncreative. I think you're going to see more creativity with this offense with players like Jalen Hurts. And, as far as the long-term approach goes, who knows? I mean, Wentz gets hurt, at inopportune times. People say he's injury prone, and I guess he is. He's only missed 8 games in his career, but they've come at bad times, and we'll see if he's able to stay healthy. If not, you need that second quarterback and a young quarterback to develop like Ertz. But as far as this year, yeah, I think absolutely. I think you can see some throwback stuff, maybe some flea flicker stuff. If you line Ertz up in the backfield, hand it to him and he pitches it back to Wentz, or things like that. What's going to be tough is if he completes a pass to Zach Ertz and you have to say Hurts to Ertz. That's going to take some practice.
For sure.
Yeah, good thing we got Merrill Reese calling the game. A seasoned vet.
That's funny that you mentioned those 2 gadget plays as well, because you saw in 2 stalemate games this year versus the Patriots and the Seahawks.
Yeah.
The flea flicker that the Seahawks ran that scored the touchdown in the 1-possession game. And then you saw Julian Edelman run the double pass and score a touchdown with the Patriots. So in back-to-back games that were pretty winnable for the Eagles, and they were in a stalemate. So
yeah.
They have some.
Now, and I know we were talking about this year. Do you see Hurts? Obviously, he's going to be on the active roster, like you said, for the gadget type plays and things like that. But do you expect him, if Wentz does go down, say early in the season, in a situation like that, would you expect him to be QB2, or do you think that would be Nate Sudfeld?
Well, again, I think it depends how quickly he picks things up. I mean, Nate Sudfeld's here for a reason, and he's the number 2 right now. If it's a long-term situation, you might see Sudfeld. If it's a short-term thing where someone has to step into the game, if Wentz goes down, kind of like he did against the Seahawks, he went down early, when they had to put in the 41-year-old Josh McCown. Had Jalen Hurts been here, maybe he would have been the guy when you saw. I mean, McCown got hurt, but they had nobody else. But I could see maybe Hurts being the guy. I'm already getting confused with Hurts and Hurts. I could see Hurts being the guy maybe in the short term, but I think if it was a long-term deal, if Carson went out, with a significant injury for a number of weeks, then I think it could be Sudfeld. But again, we don't know what Hurts is going to do. In these next few weeks. I mean, it's really hurts guys like him and a lot of all these rookies across the league not being able to be in the facility to get out on the field and move around.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got another question coming in here. This one's from Chuck Lucas. He wants to know what our overall defense is looking like this year. I guess pretty much just asking, you think they're going to hold up? You think they're going to be maybe a top of the bunch one, or you think they're going to struggle early?
Yeah. Well, I really like the moves they made in free agency, starting with probably Javon Hargrave. I mean, this kid, he's not real big, but he's very athletic. He's very quick. And in my opinion, is any time you can get a guy from the Steelers in his prime, that's a good deal, because the Pittsburgh Steelers are very good at identifying talent, developing talent, and Hargrave is really going to help that defensive line. And then you're going to have Malik Jackson coming back. You don't want to forget about him. He was their big free agent signing last year, paid him $30 million over 3 years. Got hurt in the season opener, didn't see him again the rest of the season. So he's going to be back. You might even see some snaps from Malik Jackson on the outside at end. He's not a big fan of doing that. We've talked about it, him and I and others. He would rather stay inside, but the Eagles have talked about moving him outside to provide some pass rush, because to me that defensive end spot is a little light right now with just Derek Barnett and Brandon Graham, who's 32. So after that, you have Josh Sweat, who played pretty well last year, but is he ready to step up and increase his snap count? And then you have a cast of thousands. You have Sharif Miller, who couldn't get on the field as a 4th-round pick from Penn State last year, and Joe Osman, who got hurt, who I loved a lot, thought he was going to play a role. You have Jannard Avery, who they got from the Browns in a trade. I mean, there's just a cast of thousands after Barnett and Graham that we don't know about. So that to me is a little bit of a concern, but I like how they traded for Darius Slay to kind of find that number 1 cornerback. That just helps the depth out even more. Now you have some competent guys who are going to battle for that number 2 spot. And the linebackers a little bit of a concern too, to be honest. Nate Jerry to me looks a little inconsistent. He's not real fast. And they need somebody. I mean, Nigel Bradham, say what you want, he played almost 100% of the snaps when he was healthy. Schwartz doesn't like to play with more than 1 linebacker, or 2 at the most occasionally. But you need that 1 linebacker, and Bradham was the guy. And I don't know if Jerry really fits the mold. A lot of people think T.J. Edwards, that undrafted kid from Wisconsin they signed last year after the draft, maybe he's the guy. Again, he couldn't beat out Jerry last year. Edwards was only on the field for 11% of the snaps. So, unless he takes a big step in year 2, you're probably looking at Nate Jerry, and I'm not sure that's going to be good enough. But I like what they've done in the secondary. I like what they've done at the defensive line position. Linebacker, we're going to see. I mean, you got running backs in the NFC East. You need to tackle them. Dallas has Ezekiel Elliott. The Giants have Saquon Barkley. I don't know who the Redskins have, Darius Geis, if he's still there. But, you need a linebacker. And that, to me, is something you're going to have to sort out as you go along here and through the training camp, if we have it.
Looking more so at the defensive line, they have 3 guys on the roster right now with $10+ million contracts at that position. Javon Hargrave came over from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's more of an undersized kind of guy. Malik Jackson, like you said, but he sounded a little hesitant to work outside, even though he played it earlier in his career. How do you see the D-line, more so the interior D-line rotation shaping out with those three guys on such high contracts?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to invest a lot of resources on the defensive side and the offensive side. I mean, you could look at the offensive side and look at the money they're paying Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks. They gave those guys over $100 million, almost $100 million, I should say, in extensions last year. Jason Kelsey's making a lot of money. So, they're going to invest in those two positions. That's been their philosophy for as long as, Reed was back in the early O's in 1999. So it is a lot of resources. Fletcher Cox, I think, will benefit from having that sort of rotation. Last year, you remember, they really got nicked up. They lost Jackson. They lost Tim Jernigan. Hassan Ridgeway went out. And it was really Fletcher Cox who was kind of coming off of his own surgery in the offseason on his foot. Took him a little while to round into shape. But I think, I like the fact that they have some horses there that can help Cox. It's going to be tough on offensive coordinators to try to figure out blocking schemes against Cox and Jackson and Hargrave. I mean, those are three beefy tackles, and yeah, they're paying them a lot of money, but I think they're good enough to pay that kind of money too.
Yeah, I feel like the Eagles are really banking on those three guys to get it done in the run game with the lack of linebackers, like you said.
Exactly.
Getting back to that, I mean, like you brought up Nate Jerry, TJ Edwards, who's undrafted. And then another guy who I know they got as just really a special teams contributor, but with the way the roster's shaping up, could end up having to play a role on the defense is Duke Riley or the young guy in Davion Taylor. Who do you think Jim Schwartz or yourself would trust the most right now?
Well, he's going to trust the guys that have been here before he trusts a rookie, I would say.
Right.
Rookie has to come in and prove himself. But, that Taylor guy, man, he's raw, but he's fast. You watch some film of him, and he closes quickly. I mean, he could be a guy that could be a weapon even on the back end, as kind of a box safety like we talked about. Could Jaylen Mills play in there? I mean, Taylor's the kind of kid that maybe he can play in there, and I think he'd be very athletic covering tight ends as an outside type of linebacker. So I think, we talked to him. He's a really likable kid. I think he's going to come in and, I think he'll be able to contribute quickly. But again, he's going to have to earn that under Schwartz's style. Schwartz is going to favor the guys that have been here, Nate Gary and TJ Edwards and Duke Riley, who you mentioned. They love him as a special teams guy. Maybe he can have a role on the defense. And then I really like Alex Singleton, who was a practice squad guy that they brought up, I don't know, later in the season last year, special teams. I mean, that guy brings a lot of energy and enthusiasm. He played in the CFL, another likable guy. But I like the energy that he plays with. I don't think he's ready for a role on defense, but he's good on special teams.
Agreed.
Got it. Looks like we have another comment here in the another question in the comments. I was about to say another comment in the comments. Do you think COVID-19 will affect sports events in massive way by the time the next Super Bowl hits? And we heard earlier that as of right now, the NFL is on pace to start normal time. Yeah,
I mean, I know they have a contingency plan in place to maybe begin in October. I mean, you're really going to have some training camp time to ramp up to start the season. It's like any sport, even baseball. You just can't pick up a ball and bat and go out and start playing games. I mean, you need time, especially, the NFL, the way the physicality of the game is. I mean, you need some time to get the body into football shape. But I really hope it starts on time. The NFL is going to release its schedule here, probably May 7th, 8th, or 9th, somewhere in that range, and that'll be exciting. We'll at least get to see what might be, where the Eagles play, when they play. Hopefully you can start booking trips. But I wish I had a better answer for you. I just don't know. I mean, this virus is so unpredictable and so complex that, I'm not sure we have it all figured out yet. And I really hope that they play games. We all miss them. We'll see. That's all I can say. I really don't have a good answer for that.
Looking more so at the undrafted cast of players that they signed, who is your favorite of those bunches? A couple players that you would highlight from that bunch of players that they signed.
Well, I really haven't studied them a whole lot. I've still been kind of digesting the draft, but I like Raekwon Williams, the defensive tackle. I think he was from Michigan State. He had a draftable grade on him. And again, he plays a position that the Eagles love to have guys at. I mean, he could be a kid that comes in, and I don't see them keeping more than 4 defensive tackles, and you have those 4 with Ridgeway, Cox, Jackson, and Hargrave. Maybe he can play his way into being that 5th guy. If not, he's a practice squad guy. This new CBA allows for more practice squad players, which is great, for these guys to have that kind of work. But I could see him helping at some point. He plays that position that the Eagles like. I mean, they have even Anthony Rush, who I like at D tackle, and Albert Huggins, a kid from Clemson that they from someone else's practice squad. So they're pretty deep there, but I like him. I like the running back from Cincinnati, Michael Warren. You look at this running back group that they have, they didn't really address it. Of course, they brought Clement back today. But they need I really like that bowling ball type of runner like they had, that real physical runner like they had with LeGarrette Blount when they won the Super Bowl. And Warren is supposed to be that guy. I didn't watch a lot of Cincinnati games. That's where he played. But he's supposed to be that guy that can pick up those short yardage plays. Adrian Killens, another running back from University of Central Florida. I've seen a little tape of him. Man, he looks really fast. Track guy. Yeah, so I mean, maybe he's a guy, but the running back position is, they have 6 now on the roster with those 2 undrafted kids, but I'm not sure it's good enough at this point yet. They're talking about bringing a veteran in. I don't know if LaShawn McCoy excites a lot of people, but I think they still need to do some tinkering there. And then some other guys, they brought in some cornerbacks. I'm not real sure, what they add at this point. And anybody you guys like on those undrafted free agents? I can't think of anyone else to highlight there.
I remember watching the Memphis-Cincinnati game, and Warren was really imposing as well on the Memphis defense. So that was something that I definitely noted. I love running backs personally are my favorite position.
Yeah.
My favorite player of all time, like you said, the bowling ball type, but this guy has it all, is Adrian Peterson. And he's still in the division on the Redskins. I actually watched him go for 91 yards 2 years ago on Monday Night Football versus the Eagles, and someone over pursued. He was right up the gut, and that just shows you it's one of those timeless athletes where he's just ridiculous. So I don't think you can ever get enough running backs, because there's so many different styles of running backs. You saw, and everybody's really picky. You saw Andy Reid, the old Eagles coach. He went with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who I loved, who I thought was going to fall to the Bucs at 45. But you saw they think he's Brian Westbrook 2.0. And if you think he's Brian Westbrook 2.0, and he gives you that dual threat out of the backfield receiving weapon and can run the ball like that, then you pull the trigger at 32. So I agree with that pick, but I don't think you can ever get enough running backs on the roster.
Right. We got a guy in the comments, Slay Carson. He said he's super excited about linebacker Dante Olson from Montana. And I actually, Slay's one of the guys whose opinions I trust. He used to cover Notre Dame football. And so, so if he said he's excited about a guy, I'll trust his opinion.
Yeah, I saw a little bit about Dante Olson from Montana. I forgot about him. That's a good name to keep an eye on. I mean, at a position where, like running back, I'm not sure they're quite settled there yet. So, absolutely, Dante Olson's a really good name to watch. I think he was a kind of a tackling machine at Montana. I think the knock on him, and one of the reasons he didn't get drafted, was I just think his speed isn't quite there. But he's a real physical guy who. He'll hit you. He'll make the tackle if that's what you want him to do. I just don't think he can go sideline to sideline as fast as the Eagles would like.
Absolutely. Talking about undrafted guys, and then coming off now a week removed from the NFL draft, at least the first round of the NFL draft, what was your takeaways from the virtual draft as opposed to the normal draft of years past?
Well, it felt really weird, I mean, I'm sitting here in in my war room here. This is kind of where I did everything from the draft, a lot of video and writing, but it was really strange to not have any kind of contact. I mean, they got Howie and Andy Weidel and Doug Peterson on video calls pretty quickly throughout the course of the 3 days, but usually you're sitting there and it's fast paced and you're on site, and they bring everybody in, and you can get your video and shoot those guys with the video. And then they bring the players in the next day, the day after, there's that real live interaction. You can get to know the players a little bit. They can get to know you. So it really, it was great that it happened. It was nice to have that diversion, but it was just a strange, weird situation to be a part of. And even from the Eagles' perspective, the first night after they took Jalen Reagor, like, we're trying to ask Doug questions on the Zoom call and he couldn't hear anything. And we're like, he's like, I can't hear. There was something technologically wrong. And we're all saying, like, oh, did he really like the pick? Or does he even know they took Jalen Reagor? If he can't hear us, did he hear? But that's just, that was just kind of a technology type of thing. And it was just really, really strange to do it from home, from here, what you see behind me and in my office here.
For sure. I remember witnessing the Jalen Hurts press conference after the draft, and it was a little rough. He had to say the same answer 20 to 25 times in a row. He's ready to go to work and kind of just bypass and evade all those Carson quarterback controversies. So, yeah. And expanding more on that, do you think it's a true controversy, or do you think it's more so insurance and security for not to have it to bring in a 40-year-old off the bench and score 9 points at home in a playoff game?
I think it's an insurance policy and a controversy. That's, I think, why they liked Hurts, is he's not the kind of kid that's going to come in here and make waves. He was benched in the national championship game with Alabama, and he stayed around. He didn't transfer that next year. He stuck it out and was happy to, not happy, but, he was content backing up Tua, however you say his last name, Tagovailoa. He was content backing him up. So he's not a kid that's going to come in here and make those kind of waves. And I think that's kind of what they wanted from a quarterback to kind of come in. I think he's going to be a really good fit culturally inside that locker room. That's what they talked about. I'm excited to meet the kid. He seems like a real, everybody speaks so highly of him, what a great kid he is, what a great person he is. And I'm looking forward to kind of meeting him and just seeing how he interacts with other players. But you're right, on that video call after he got picked, he was just like, he wanted to go party. He wanted to go celebrate with his family and his friends who were there. He was done with us. He was like, look, I'm just going to answer these questions as cliche as I can. And it was like pulling teeth trying to get him to say anything. But it was a long day for him, I'm sure. So I'm looking forward to seeing him once things do open up. Obviously, he's going to be a real story to watch, and how this whole relationship with Carson pans out. And we're all hoping to get Carson here on a conference call soon. I know he's got a lot on his plate with the birth of his daughter on Monday. But I know we're all kind of chomping at the bit to hear what he has to say about this.
For sure.
Yeah, he seemed to be, he reached out to Hurts via Twitter, and then same thing with Jaylen Reagor, and then obviously, the birth of his daughter. But with players reaching out, what caught me by surprise the most was Jaylen Reagor said Alshon Jeffery was actually one of the first people to reach out to him and told him, come here, be ready to work, and be ready to win. So while everybody's speculating that Jeffery probably won't be on the team, like you said earlier, you believe it looks like he may be or will be. I just feel like Jeffery, the way he's acting, is a guy who isn't even concerned that he's not going to be an Eagle next season.
Yeah, I think, Alshon's a pretty quiet guy. When you talk to him in the locker room, you really have to kind of be in the front row of the pack that's trying to talk to him, because he's very hard to hear. He talks very softly, very quietly. And I know he's probably the guy that, speculation anyways, he's the guy that outed Carson Wentz and kind of spoke badly of him. But aside from that, I think, he's, generally considered a pretty decent teammate. And guys always talk about him, the younger receivers, about how he helps them. And, I just think, maybe he's a little moody at times. But listen, I'm not an athlete. I'm not in that locker room all the time. I think it's great that he texted Jaylen and kind of welcomed him to the NFL, and, getting the mindset of winning is what he apparently said. And, he's 30 years old. He's been in the league a long time. He's got a lot of knowledge to impart, and I don't think he has a problem imparting it at all to the other receivers.
I think Alshon honestly could go down as one of the most important and impactful signings the Eagles have ever made. If you look They signed him to pair with Carson Wentz. He says that he wants to pair with Carson Wentz, and you see what they do. Actually, that Super Bowl year, they had 3 receivers have 8+ touchdowns. So, and Nelson Aguilar was a part of that bunch. And you see he's signing a minuscule $1 million contract with the Raiders. So that just shows you how the level that Carson Wentz was playing at and how Alshon really fits into this fold here.
And I think he brought a lot of confidence in that locker room in that Super Bowl season. I think a lot of guys were always talking about Alshon and how, the expectation was we're going to win the Super Bowl. I don't care that we're playing this dynasty in the New England Patriots and Tom Brady. We're going to win this game. And, that's kind of what he talked about, in the 2 weeks between the title game and the Super Bowl. He talked about it all week in Minnesota. I just think he instilled a lot of confidence in that team, and really that might be a little bit undersold at this point. But listen, you can say what you want about Alshon, but they won a Super Bowl. He made a huge catch to start that game off in the end zone against the Patriots. The first touchdown he caught gave him a 9-3 lead, I think, after Elliott missed the extra point. But that was huge. I mean, to get off to that kind of start after he had to settle for a field goal the first time down. I mean, Alshon is a real, should really be given a lot of credit for what the Eagles did winning that Super Bowl.
That catch was also on Eric Rowe, too. So it was a little payback there by Howie and the front office. So it was a little payback right there.
Yep.
And not to mention, I mean, it came out after the season, after the fact, that he was playing basically almost the whole year with the shoulder injury.
Right.
And that even makes that catch in the end zone going up full extension even more impressive. And that's why I just feel like anybody who questions his character or his heart or will to win is misguided and has short-term memory.
Yeah, it was a torn rotator cuff is what it turned out to be, that he needed surgery on, and he missed the start of the next season. So it's not his fault that he was guaranteed his contract. Howie decided to guarantee it because they wanted some wiggle room in the salary cap. Not his fault. I mean, you want to guarantee me, $16 million? Sure, go right ahead. I'll take it. Who wouldn't? So it's not his fault that he got that kind of money, and now his contract looks bad. But I think he's a prideful guy and a professional, and I think if he is able to rehab and come back, he could help this team in 2020.
I remember he came back from injury last year in the Miami game, and he looked really good before he obviously got injured again. But he's never a guy that's been super, super productive, but he's the type of guy where he does more than what the stats would say, where you're going to throw a ball to him, like you said, in the Super Bowl. I think he ended up with 3 catches for 85 yards, but one was a huge touchdown to start the entire onslaught of scoring in that game. So
yep, absolutely.
Exactly. And now the added speed to the offense, too, is just going to make a guy who has the skill set of Jeffery look even better or give him more options.
Right. That speed should help open up some of those underneath routes to even Arcega-Whiteside and Jeffery and even the tight ends and the running backs. I mean, that speed when you can stretch the field like that, you have to send somebody to cover the guy going deep or you're going to get torched. But that should open up some of the underneath stuff and make Jeffery and hopefully Arcega-Whiteside even more effective.
DeSean Jackson recently just said on his Instagram, I think of yesterday actually, he still believes he's the number 1 wide receiver. Where do you see DeSean Jackson fitting back into this offense? And do you think he still has it left in the tank?
DeSean Jackson doesn't lack for confidence. I'll tell you that, man. He's, he didn't get to where he is right now by being meek and mild, man. That guy just, he believes he's the best. And I think he's still pretty good. I mean, his problem's always been, and that, what is he, 33 now, I think? I mean, he's still fast. You hope he's still fast after that core muscle surgery. You don't know what that's going to do to him. But he's a guy that he's small. He can't stay on the field. And I know everybody was talking about KJ Hamler during the draft, and let's bring Hamler and him. But, Hamler's small too. And I could see, I know the Broncos took him. I could see Hamler having some difficulty staying healthy because of his size. And, that's really kind of the knock on Jackson. But, man, when he plays, I mean, he's one of the best fast wide receivers in the league. I mean, he's got almost as many touchdowns of 50-plus yards as Jerry Rice had in his career. I think he's like 2 or 3 behind him. So, I mean, there's no doubt that guy's fast. And I hope he still has that speed because that's what plays for him. He still thinks he does. I saw that he did put out there that he's begun running routes again. And, we'll see. You hope that core muscle surgery didn't take too much of that speed away.
Yeah, and actually when he played the one game last season, he had 2 of the longest of 5 longest in the air touchdowns, and he played 1 week in the season, and that's 2 of them. So it just shows you what happens if that's over a 16-game slate, or even he gives you 10 or 13 games. So
right.
Well, that's
right.
what I was just gonna say. Because Ed brought up earlier that he thought the Eagles' offense was kind of vanilla last season, and Hurts might change that. I mean, if you look at that Redskins game, losing D-Jax just totally – it looked like 2 different offenses, 2 different teams on the field as opposed from week 1 throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you talk about Hurts being an insurance policy for Wentz going down. I mean, I think these receivers, the speed guys they brought in, are insurance policies if Jackson goes down again, which track record is he's going to go down again. And now you hope your offense won't be stuck in neutral or kind of bogged down, because you still have speed that you can insert for Jackson and keep your offense running at a high level.
Just to bounce off what Ed and Sean said, I think when D-Jack went down in the Washington game, I think that was an eye-opener for Howie, because, like Sean said, immediate change in how the offense ran and was playing. So now he brings 4 to 5 new speed wide receivers. Now, if one goes down, it seems like he just has an infinite toy box of, all right, next one up. And to keep that speed in this offense. So I'm a big fan of bringing in the speed. I'm just worried about not having a tall wide receiver, because that Liz Frank injury that Alshon has is no joke. And even if the season is delayed maybe a week or 2, he still might be not back till week 14, 15 if he is back at all. So,
well, Nick, I don't want you to lose any sleep there about the big receiver. I mean, they still have Ertz, and Ertz. They still have Ertz. They still have Goddard. I think they've got enough weaponry that will overcome that. So just to hopefully put your mind at ease.
Yeah, that's why I think they'll also hold on to like 7 wide receivers. Sean's saying, talking about Marcus Goodwin making the roster. I think he will, just because they need security. Like they said with Hurts, being you don't want a 40-year-old off the bench. You also don't want to have J.J. Arcega-Whiteside somehow thrust into another wide receiver 1 role if all these guys, like you said, the durability issues with the size and the speed. So that's why I think they're going to possibly try and keep as many, whether it's a label, this guy plays special teams like Mac Hollins over the years. That's why I think they'll keep a higher number at the wide receiver position, more so like 7 or possibly even 8. But I see 7. 8 would be a lot, but that would be more. You got to have a contribution on special.
That might be a little too much.
Yeah, I don't see more than 5, 6 at the most.
Yeah, I haven't run the numbers, but you still need running backs. Maybe that's why they're kind of hedging their bets at running back. I mean, you got Sanders and Scott for sure, and then Clement, I'm sure, will make the team. And then, that's 3. Elijah Holyfield hasn't played it down in the NFL, and then the 2 undrafted kids. So maybe they keep 3 running backs, 6 receivers, and they like to play a lot of 12 personnel with 2 tight ends. They really played a dangerous game last year by having just 2 active tight ends a lot of times. But they have Josh Perkins that I think deserves a spot on this team as of now. Alex Ellis. So, I mean, you probably would like to have 3 or 4 tight ends on the roster. And then you have your offensive linemen. They had a lot of injuries on the offensive line. You look at their playoff game, they played without Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks against the Seahawks. So, you're going to need that depth on the O-line too. So, I mean, we're getting way ahead of ourselves with the numbers, but, it's cool to talk about.
Sure.
Absolutely. All right. Well, it's getting towards that time where we're gonna wrap this on up. I'd like to thank Ed for taking time out of his day to come join us on the Unsportsmanlike Content Podcast. We really appreciate it, Ed.
Hey, man.
We had a great time, great discussion. Thanks to everybody in the comments for getting your questions in, and thanks for my guys Sean and Zach for joining us today. So. Everybody,
make sure you follow Ed on Twitter if you're looking for great Eagles content. Been around the game, obviously covers them for Sports Illustrated. It's at Ed Kracz. I'm correct, right?
Yeah, it's at Kratzy, Kracze.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks, Sean. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yep, no problem. Yeah, make sure you give him a follow.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Appreciate it, man.
Appreciate it, man. And thank you guys for tuning in.